Hi everyone, Angelo here, and it's the 14th Sunday in Ordinary Time. So we're in chapter 6 of Mark, and this reading, this is one of the more famous readings, where what Jesus says is a prophet is never accepted in his own hometown. And the words they have here is a prophet is only despised in his own country, among his own relations, and in his own house. But essentially what happens in this story is that Jesus and his disciples go back to his hometown, so we presume that that's Nazareth, and Jesus goes to the people, but the people looking at him like, who's you? We know you. We know your family. Like, are you this great miracle worker? So a lot of doubt and skepticism. And that's when Jesus looks at them and says what he said, that a prophet isn't despised in his own country. And ultimately Jesus couldn't do much of his work there, because their lack of faith amazed him. But I imagine that this would have been an awkward situation for everybody involved. I imagine awkward for nobody more than Jesus, but awkward too for his family. And I would say ultimately awkward for, I suppose, the whole hometown. And I think too, what would the disciples have thought? Because think about it, they're still fairly early on in this mission of following Christ. We're only in chapter 6 of Mark. So they themselves probably have a whole lot of doubt and still willing to keep faith and follow along, but hoping that, okay, when we go to his hometown, at least when we see how the people there are with him, it will bring us some hope. But instead, they didn't find this dear love and admiration. Instead what they found was, besides skepticism, opposition, and a lot of it. And, I imagine a lot of things wouldn't have surprised Jesus. So the fact that their lack of faith, that is what amazed him. It probably goes to show how little faith they actually did have because of who he was, ironic as that is. It's like they all had their own understanding of Christ and they all believed that that understanding was solid, only to realize that they didn't. And that happens even still to this day. So, I look at this same line here, a prophet is only despised in his own country. I look at it and my hope is that this saying becomes less of a declaration and more of a call for change. Because for some reason, it is known, plenty of people do find it very difficult to accept those growing among them. And, maybe it's because we know that they aren't perfect and we expect heroes to be perfect. And because we are so aware of their imperfections, we believe, they are nothing special. They don't have the presence of God in them. And yet we could look at Jesus himself and think that about him too. But I think that is what the presence of God in our lives is actually like. Meaning that Christ has a way of entering our lives, and we are the ones who then have to rework our own understandings of God's presence. And it's not that God would package God's self in this box and then present God's self to us, but rather over time we would be the ones building packages, building boxes for God to then have to fit into, which obviously that can't work. So it's a matter of re-understanding everything about life and what we believe we know about God's presence in new ways. And that comes through our prayer life, for sure, our relationship with God, relationship with church and community. And then together we're able to discern, okay, who is God in our lives? Because, like I said, God doesn't fit into boxes. Like, for example, here, this bit about Jesus having siblings. And we have different explanations as to why. So some might say the original Greek, the word that they used, could be translated as relatives, and that what we have here in English, saying that he has sisters and brothers, is a mistranslation. Or other explanations might be that Joseph would have had children from a previous marriage, whatever the case might be. And as Catholics, we are supposed to maintain the virginity of Mary, whatever that means, though. And at least, let me not speak for everybody. I'll speak for myself. I personally have no idea what that means. And I'm not saying that is something that it isn't important. I'm just saying that personally, I don't see it as this big pressing issue. Especially because I feel like I have yet to receive a solid explanation as to why this is so important to our faith. Because the explanations I at least have come across or have heard all seem to be centered around some kind of puritanical vibes. And I'm not saying that is right. I'm not saying that it's wrong. I'm not saying that I can't be wrong. I mean, just like everybody else, I still on this faith journey too, learning and growing. But to be honest, in my religious imagination, which means that this is an opinion, but in my religious imagination, Mary was a victim of rape. And I mean, I hope really and truly that that wasn't the case, because nobody should ever experience that, like ever. That, I mean, as we know, that is a severe violation of our humanity. But the thing is, I also feel like that isn't outside the scope of the depravity of humanity, because we see it happening so much today. How many little girls are being abused today in our society? So would we say Mary was no longer a virgin because she was possibly a victim of rape? Or would we respect God any less if we found out that Jesus was a product of rape? Would it make the Holy Family any less holy that Joseph was a merciful man who would have cared for those who had nobody else to care for them? And I know all of this might sound blasphemous. I totally get that and I appreciate that. And if that is how you feel, I am sorry, I don't mean to offend you. But I feel like to consider that the possibility of something bad happening to anybody in the Holy Family, that isn't possible, I feel like that is actually a bigger blasphemy. Because to not even consider that the Holy Family could have been victims of immense suffering is to negate that bad things could happen to anyone, especially to holy people. And to not consider that bad things could happen, especially to people in the Holy Family, is to ultimately negate the cruelty of the cross. Because it's then at that point, we start to see Jesus as an object to be sacrificed, instead of believing that Christ, in God's unending love, that love is what led Christ to sacrifice. Which is very iconic of today's reading. Us still trying to fit God into a box and having expectations of God. But I mean, who's to say? Really, who's to say? All we know is that we see this idea often. And the thing is, we unfortunately oftentimes don't accept and don't promote our rising stars among us. And my hope is ultimately that we do. Because I know there are so many people that do, and those people continue to give me hope as they advocate for the youth and advocate for our prophets among us. So I wish blessings to everybody who advocate for our youth, for our prophets. And I continue to pray that we all may be able to recognize Christ's presence, God's presence, that prophecy in each and every single one of us. Anyway, that's it from me this week. And as always, I appreciate you so much for watching. Thank you.